Hi everyone and welcome back to Warno for another deck build today. So yesterday we looked at the second Panzer Grenadiers in the new meta, and today I'm going to look at the 4th MSD. Now obviously please do check out that video as well, because there'll be some relevance to what I've done with this deck. A couple of things that were mentioned in the comments there make me think about this deck in particular, and that's why I've gone for the 4th MSD, and I was considering between this and the KDA. I've built the deck, and I actually recorded myself building the deck and realised that I'd spent about 30 minutes chatting away about it. And that to me is a little bit too long for a deck video. I try to keep it 20 minutes or less, just because I think, as much as it's fun to perhaps listen to me explain my reasoning, sometimes I can ramble on a bit if I get going. So let's go through the deck that I've already built, and it'll just speed things up a tiny bit. Logistics. Well, it's pretty much the same affair as we've had before. I always like to take a small vehicle so they can be spread out all across the front lines. You only have one choice here, it's the MTLB. Then in terms of the other vehicle, this is completely your choice. You get 3 of these, which is 2,000 each, 6,000 supply. You get 4 of the choppers, which is 1,500 or 6,000 total supply. I take the choppers purely because they're a bit faster getting to the front lines or near the front lines on a larger map. But it doesn't really matter. If you're in a 1v1 situation, it probably works out a lot cheaper to buy the big trucks, and maybe you'd prefer that. In a big team game and 10v10s, I tend to worry a little bit less about the amount of cash, because by the end of the game you usually have an overabundance of points anyway. And then in terms of the commands, I mean, you can take any of these here. There is only 2 of each. My advice, as always, and my preference is to go to something wheeled because it's faster. That is all. It's faster. And I went for the cheap option here because it's got the same armor. It just doesn't have a gun, but I don't want it to shoot at stuff anyway. It's just going to give its position away even faster. Only other thing you consider here is perhaps taking the MI9, if you were thus inclined. But that's it. Fell Depot, again, it's like with any other deck, you could take it if you want. If you're going to be heavy support with a lot of artillery, which you can do in this deck, then yeah, you could consider doing that. Infantry, you've got forward deployment troops and you've got non-forward deployment troops. It completely depends how you want to play this deck, what you bring, I think. Infantry is always very variable from playstyle to playstyle. If I was doing 1v1s, then I'd probably be very keen to take the FS Jaeger Commander because it's forward deployable, and getting points early in a 1v1 can be very beneficial. In a 2v2 it could be very beneficial. In a 3v3, a 4v4 and then a 10v10, I mean, it's not as big of a deal, and I tend to play the bigger team games and the 10v10s. So for this deck, I wouldn't take that. If you're doing 1v1s, I'd certainly consider it, because you want more commanders anyway. Taking just a couple of commanders in a deck isn't enough in 1v1, because they will get sniped. So in terms of other forward deployment, I've taken the forward deployment SPG-9. I love the SPG-9. It's good harassment for infantry. It's good at killing small transport vehicles, and having it up at the front line, yeah, it's good. Just, yes, it's in there. FS Jaeger and FS Jaeger, both stacks of. Remember, the FS Jaeger here get the Special Forces trait compared to the FS Jaeger on the West German side. Special Forces trait is really good. It is a massive bonus to survivability and everything else. It's worth bringing it in. FS Jaeger Metis. I like anything with a Metis launch. I think it's a really good kind of longish, medium to long range ATGM. FS is nice and forward deployable. These guys would be my longish range ATGM to hold the front line while I wait for my conkers to arrive. You do have the other ATGM option, and that is forward deployable. However, the penetration is only 16. Its only bonus here over the Metis is its range. So I'd rather take the Metis personally for that forward deployment option, and then just accept that the conkers are going to arrive later with their 20 penetration. And I wouldn't take them anything special. I'd just bring them in EUAZ. I don't think they need to be in anything else. In terms of other things that are going to come up later, I think the 30mm grenade launchers are still alright anti-infantry when used carefully. So I would still bring those. I think they're better than the 7.2mm, definitely. Even though they're forward deployable, I don't think... I mean, they're cheap. But I'd rather just bring the 30mm in later. Because I think it's better still. Obviously, dispersion and everything else and its splash radius has been reduced, but they're still alright. Pioneer Flams, my preference, coming in a truck. Sorry, I don't know why it was selected the MTLB. Just bring them in a truck. Cheap, cheerful, effective. That's why they're there. They also have the Resolute trait. Remember, everything in this deck pretty much has the Resolute trait, which is awesome. It means they take less suppression. They're just a little bit more resistant. I think that's a good benefit for this deck. Panzerjäger. Again, I would bring them in the truck or an SPW. Either or. I think the truck, again, just to keep the price down. Really good squad. Obviously, 2 20 penetration launchers in a forest or a town against vehicles. Devastating. Obviously, range is pretty short, but devastating. So on those, forest-based maps, they're going to do amazingly well. The Motsuchin BTR are my other choice. You could take the standard Motsuchin. They do get the whole IFV bonus, but you need to keep them near a BMP then, so you're having the extra cost, and it's whether you want the BMPs. And the reality is, most of the time, I don't. I've not been having the best experience with BMP ones lately, so I can live without them. I'm quite happy to bring these guys in. An SPW-70 just gives them a little bit more firepower when you're moving through towns, as long as you keep the SPWs at range, because they do have those 2 machine guns. So that's my choice. This is your zombie pushing line infantry that comes up at the rear. That's what I would take for bigger games and 10v10s. But you could build it much more forward deployment if you wished with the other ATGMs, and I'm not really bothered about the FS Jaeger SMGs, but certainly the Commander if you're so inclined. Artillery, there's a good mix of artillery, but it's pretty much all very samey. You've got the D30 cannons and the D20 cannons. I'm taking both of those just because I can't take 2 stacks of the D20. You could take more cards of the self-propelled stuff, but it's pricey. You have to take the cost into account, I guess. They have the advantage that they move faster after firing, therefore are less susceptible to counter battery. But if you keep these guys at distance, keep them spaced out and keep them moving, they should be fine, even versus someone who's very actively counter batterying. I'd still avoid this. I don't think it's very good. And the Smirch, I've taken it because I want to test it out. I want to see how good it is at counter battery. It's got a long aiming time, so you're going to have to be shit hot, to put it simply, on your counter battery and catching stuff out. But I'm really curious because someone used a Lars against me and killed all of these slow moving towed artillery pieces. My own fault for having them clustered together. Won't make that mistake again. But an interesting point to note. Tanks, definitely take the Pack MT12. I think they're really worth it right now. They've got the missile. That ATGM's pretty darn good. Good range on it as well. I'd just take 1 card because I can't think of a game where I've really brought out more than 6. They're just going to hold the defensive line. Worst case scenario, they're going to get artillery and killed. But most of the time, I've not needed to call many in because they're your defensive line units. Tanks-wise, definitely taking a card of these. They have the ATGM, the T55AM2 because of the front armor, and the T55AM2 because of the armor command tank. And then some T55As. You could easily take the TR55s if you want the flame tanks. You get more of these, you get 10 of them. So they're my spammable tank for harassment and general annoyance in this deck, because you're without really heavy duty tanks. Recon, There's nothing stand out here. You don't have any ground surveillance radar. So take what you want. I've gone for the Alpha Clara with the UAZ RECON. That makes 18 RECON units on one card, if used sensibly. I've then gone for the Einsatz Grouper because they're a big squad. They are special forces. And, you know, these are sadly not forward deployable, but they're the ones I will send into the towns and potentially to do fighting with the other infantry. And I'm also taking the chopper just because I like the fact that it's fast response and can be sent with the other helicopters. And in this deck I've got quite a few helicopters just because of how it's built. Anti-air, Cubs, Strela 10Ms. The Strela 10M is much better than the other one for 10 points more. Take it, is my advice. The Cub, again, you really need to take it, but you need to babysit it. It is good, but you need to keep it alive against Seed. And keep moving it. Don't let it sit still. After it's fired, it needs to move. Shilkas, they're better than they were, but we're starting to get into expensive points here, so I just wouldn't bother. Again, the radar. Now, the Igla is the better anti-air unit, but I have found that with any divisions where I have forward deployment troops and I am moving units forward, I really need forward deployable anti-air, so I have to take the Strelas. Because they counter those early helicopters, the potential for a helo rush, it's just so beneficial to have them. So yes, they're not as accurate, but they will potentially scare off a helo push. Not in every situation. If you get hit with a full helo rush, you're stuffed anyway. But it's better than nothing. And nothing is what you get if you come in with the Iglas later. So if you are forward deployment and you have the option to take forward deployable anti-air, take it. It will save your life and the life of your forward deployment troops in some situations. Helicopters, Mi-24P AT, because it gets some ECM. Only 10, but it gets some. The Mi-24D AT2 because we get more of them. And yes, ECM is 0, but its max health is 10. Mi-24D anti-air, ECM 0, but max health is 10. So the reason for this is that means they take a hit from a big anti-air unit and then can potentially escape. Not saying they will, but there's a chance. So my aggressive one, because it's got 10 ECM, is going to be the Mi-24P. That's going to be the aggressive one because it does have ECM and it's got the Concon missiles, but it's expensive. And then we've got these ones which can be used more defensively or aggressively, potentially, but just bearing in mind that, you know, they're more susceptible, but will still take a couple of hits. The Mi-8TV Rocket 2 are fantastic at killing infantry. So if you get pushed with infantry that are pushing ahead of their AA, this is your response. This is your response. Problem is, max damage 8. Big anti-air that does 9 damage is going to whack these in one. Bear that in mind. But they're still better than the, you know, choppers with 4 health, which will go down in one hit. So you've got some good chopper options here. The Mi-24P AT2 is also very good. It's got less rockets, it's got more Concon missiles, but again, it's expensive, so I've just not taken it on that basis. This gives me a bit more flexibility taking these, and also it means I've got 6 choppers instead of, you know, only being able to take 5. Aircraft. So I feel like there's a couple of ways you could do this. My personal feeling is that I don't want to rely purely on aircraft. However, the MiG-29 is your best anti-air, so you're going to take that. You're going to want something anti-tank because your tanks aren't great. Even if you have decent ATGMs, your tanks aren't great. And it's not like you have a TOW 2 in this deck. So I would take the Su-22 because it's got better accuracy and higher ECM. HE Bomber, again, I'm taking the Su-22 because of the ECM. It just makes it a little bit more survivable. And then I'm taking the Seed, because with you relying on these potentially for killing big tanks, yes, the HE bomber isn't the best thing to use against big tanks, but it will still do damage to them. Seed is just going to be helpful in that situation. The cluster bomber, you only get 2 bombs. So the reason I'm not taking that is because you only get 2 bombs. And you have to be deadly accurate with it. But, you know, it's not a bad option. You could take it, don't get me wrong. But I've opted for a selection which will allow me to hit infantry as well. Hence the HE. There you go, that's the deck. Let me know what you would do differently in this deck. In particular, for this deck, infantry and aircraft. Because as I say, I think here you could build the infantry slightly differently. And I also think the aircraft could be done very differently. Because I know some people love the MiG-21s. But everything else, I feel, is going to be built in a similar way. But I feel like infantry and air could be very different. Like, I know right away someone's going to take the Zischerungs because of that Resolute trait here. It does give them a bonus. But I'm really curious what you guys would do differently. Thanks very much for watching. Please do like, share, subscribe. And I'll see you all soon for some more Warner.